I'm John Stonestreet with the Two-Minute Warning. Anyone who wants to defend traditional marriage is often considered a bigot, intolerant, homophobic. It's a really tough time to say the things that we're convicted of in the public square. So I asked Ryan Anderson of the Heritage Foundation to help us answer a few basic questions about the issue of same-sex marriage. Ryan, the issue of same-sex marriage is often phrased in terms of equality. Don't gay couples have the right to express their love in marriage just like anyone else?
Everyone in this debate is for marriage equality, although the left seems to use that phrase as if it just applies to people in favor of redefining marriage. But in order to know whether or not a marriage law treats all spouses equally, you have to know what marriage is and why it matters. The state's not just interested in the romantic lives of consenting adults just for the sake of romance. The state's interest in ensuring that children grow up with a mother and a father. And marriage exists to unite a man and a woman as husband and wife, to then be equipped to be mother and father to any children that their union produces. And this can take place, and it does take place, while leaving adults free to live and to love as they choose. So in all 50 states, two people of the same sex can live with each other and love each other. They can join a liberal church that'll perform a wedding ceremony, and they can work for a business that'll give them benefits if the church and the business chooses to. What's at stake right now is whether the Supreme Court will redefine marriage, and then the government, using coercive force, will make every citizen, religious community, and business recognize this new definition of what marriage is.
Well, another question is, how will any gay couple getting married affect anyone else's heterosexual marriage?
Many people ask, how would gay marriage hurt your marriage? And it's a good question, and there's a good answer to it. If you redefine marriage to say that the sexual complementarity of a man and a woman is arbitrary, then more or less everything about marriage becomes arbitrary. There'll be no reason why marriage should be the union of two people rather than more, why it should be a sexually exclusive union rather than a sexually open union, why it should be a permanent union rather than a temporary union. And so we see the same voices who advocate to redefine marriage to exclude sexual complementarity are also the voices who are saying that we should redefine marriage to include polygamy and polyamory and group marriage, to include sexually open relationships, and even to include expressly temporary relationships where marriage just lasts as long as the love lasts. But if you redefine marriage in this way, you make it more about adult desire than the needs of children. And you also make it, in principle, you teach the idea that children don't need a mother and a father, and then you have the coercive force of law enforce that point. So we've already seen in jurisdictions like Massachusetts, Illinois, and Washington, D.C., the government has shut down Christian adoption agencies that thought that orphans deserved a mother and a father. And the state in this instance said that that was an act of discrimination, that to incentivize to place children with mothers and fathers without being on an equal footing with fathers and mothers counted as discrimination. And it shut down these adoption agencies. So these are some of the consequences of what redefining marriage will entail for our political community.
Well, if marriage does stabilize society, then why is heterosexual marriage in such bad shape? And shouldn't we let homosexual couples have a shot at it? And maybe it could even help stabilize the homosexual community as well.
Some people argue that marriage is already in such bad shape. How could it hurt marriage to let more people get married? But this overlooks what's really at stake in this debate. It's not a question of who has access to marriage. It's a question of what marriage is. And the reason that marriage is in such bad shape today is largely the result of heterosexuals following bad liberal ideology and following a false understanding of what marriage is. And we can think about this historically. A generation ago, government redefined what marriage is for the first time. With the introduction of no-fault divorce, the law now taught that marriage need not be a permanent relationship. Whereas before you would sue for divorce and you would cite fault. In common law, it was the 3 A's of abuse, abandonment, and adultery. And when you would file for divorce, it would be because your spouse was abusing you or had abandoned you or committed adultery, serious reasons for ending a marriage. But with no-fault divorce, the government now said marriage need to last only as long as the love lasts. And you can divorce a spouse for any reason or no reason at all. And we saw divorce rates rise from near single digits to nearly 50% because the law taught something about marriage. So why would we right now want to double down on the mistakes of a broken marriage culture where half of our nation's children grow up without the love and care of both a mother and a father, and seal those harms and go further in the direction of destabilizing and deinstitutionalizing marriage? Wouldn't it be better to strengthen the marriage culture by having the law teach that men and women should commit to each other permanently and exclusively as husband and wife, to then be the mother and the father to the children that their union creates?
And finally, we hear all the time, same-sex marriage is inevitable, and to be against it is to be on the wrong side of history. Is that the case?
I think this is a short-sighted argument for several reasons. First, history is not going to judge anyone because history can't judge. We will be judged by someone other than history. And that judgment is the judgment that matters. But second, there's no wrong side of history apart from what the truth of the matter is. There's a right and there's a wrong side of the truth. But there's no right or wrong side of history. So the question we need to ask is, what is the truth about marriage? And then we should do everything in our power to witness to the truth of marriage. And then lastly, nothing's inevitable in this discussion. If we think back just 40 years ago, when the Supreme Court issued the Roe v. Wade decision, all of the media elites and the academic elites and the politicians were saying that pro-lifers were on the wrong side of history, and that abortion on demand was inevitable, and that there was nothing that anyone could do to roll back that clock. And yet 40 years later, we now see that my generation is more pro-life than my parents' generation. And we see that a majority of Americans today identify as pro-life, whereas at the time it was only a third. Pro-lifers made gains because they put to work. They went to work, and they did the work of building a culture of life, making the arguments, forming the coalitions, doing the work of spreading the gospel of life. And so too, we have to do that now on the marriage question. It's not a matter of what history will do, it's a matter of what we will do and whether we'll bear witness to the truth of marriage.
Thanks, Ryan. We put together a lot of other resources that can be helpful for you. Just visit us at colsoncenter.org/2-minute warning. Thanks for joining us.